Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I am so glad you're joining me today because, well, we're doing something a little bit different. And honestly, I think you're going to find it absolutely fascinating. Usually we're sifting through pages and pages of dense data, right? We're looking at extensive research papers or reading these super lengthy articles to kind of distill the facts down for you. But today we are focusing our lens on a microscopic slice of source material. I'm talking about literally just a handful of words. Now, you might be wondering why on earth would we spend time on a single sentence? Well, sometimes deconstructing a really highly concentrated piece of text can actually yield way more insight than reading an entire textbook. A single, carefully crafted phrase can completely reframe how we visualize a whole era. Our source text today contains a title, Sumerians, the Celestial Architects of Civilization, and a single super provocative sentence about human history. We're going to dive straight into a textual deconstruction because this specific phrase challenges our most basic, fundamental assumptions about the dawn of human order. Let's get right into exactly what we're dealing with.
Sumerians, the first civilization that fell from the sky. Just let that sink in for a second. Really absorb those words. When we normally think about the origins of human civilization, we instinctively use words associated with upward growth, right? We talk about human societies rising from the mud or climbing the ladder of progress. We discuss the gradual emergence or the organic growth of a culture. All of those standard historical terms imply the slow, agonizingly gradual upward trajectory. We picture generations making tiny agricultural shifts, slowly forming villages, which, slowly form towns over thousands and thousands of years. But this source text, it deliberately shatters that slow-pace framing. It uses the word fell. Falling is sudden. Falling relies on gravity, not effort. Falling implies a point of origin that is incredibly high up, completely detached from the Earth itself. By describing them as the first civilization that fell from the sky, the text immediately forces us to abandon our traditional evolutionary view of history and confront this image of a sudden, breathtaking arrival. It's literally a linguistic shock to the system. Now, to truly understand the weight of this sentence, we need to break apart the author's title for this piece.
So this brings us to the first phase of our textual deconstruction. The author titles this concept the Celestial Architects. Let's isolate that phrase for a minute. What's really interesting about this combination of words is how it sets up an immediate expectation. Let's just consider the word architects for a second. What does an architect actually do? Well, an architect plans. An architect relies on mathematics, structure, deliberate intention, and profound organization. It is a highly grounded, super methodical, and incredibly active process. You don't just accidentally architect a building, right? And you definitely don't accidentally architect a society. It requires a supreme level of consciousness and deliberate step-by-step building from a really strong foundation. Calling the Sumerians the architects of civilization implies they drew up the very blueprints for human society itself. They laid down the absolute foundation of order, law, and structure. But the author doesn't just call them architects. They place a highly specific, very unexpected modifier right in front of that word, and it changes the entire context of their work.
Celestial. By definition, celestial means positioned or relating to the sky, or outer space as observed in astronomy. It refers to the ethereal, the heavenly, that untouchable void far above us. So the absolutely crucial point here is this. The author has taken a word that represents the infinite, the ungrounded, and the sky-focused, celestial, and smashed it together with a word that represents grounded, methodical, earthly construction, architect. A celestial architect. Why use this specific word choice? What does it imply? Well, it implies a total paradox. It suggests that the blueprints for this first civilization were not entirely of the Earth, or at least their inspiration was drawn from looking up, not looking down. Think about what it actually means for ancient people to pull mathematical order directly from the stars. It creates this striking, vivid image of builders whose minds were literally positioned in outer space, observing the perfect clockwork rotations of the cosmos, and then pulling that flawless celestial order down to construct human civilization in the dirt. It is a brilliant, poetic collision of the heavens and the earth, contained entirely within just 2 words. But as we continue through the author's claim, the imagery gets even more intense. Okay, so let's shift our focus now to the second and arguably even more mysterious half of our source excerpt, fell from the sky. We touched on this briefly at the very beginning, but we really need to look closer. This is where the text moves from describing who they were, the celestial architects, to how they actually arrived. Think about the physical act of falling. It lacks friction. It's immediate. When something falls from a great height, it impacts the earth with immense, disruptive energy. The author uses this exact phrase to characterize the dawn of this first civilization, suggesting an origin story that is completely devoid of the typical messy transitional phases we always expect in ancient history. It paints a picture of an overnight transformation. Imagine going from basic survival, roaming around in fragmented tribes, to suddenly possessing complex laws, monumental architecture, codified writing systems, and advanced agriculture in what feels like the blink of an eye. That is the kind of massive impact event this text is describing. It permanently altered the landscape of human existence. It's as if the author is telling us that civilization didn't sprout gradually like a seed. It landed violently, decisively, like a meteor.
And this brings us to the central tension of the entire source text. On one hand, we have the architects of civilization, representing an active, deliberate, and highly conscious building process. It's the ultimate expression of human control. But then, on the exact same hand, we have fell from the sky, representing a sudden, unexplained, and fundamentally passive arrival. Actually, think about it. You cannot actively fall in a controlled, methodical manner, right? Falling is just something that happens to you. So how in the world do we reconcile this stark linguistic contrast? How can a civilization be the deliberate planners of society while simultaneously arriving in a sudden, seemingly passive drop from the heavens? Well, the source material deliberately places these two completely contradictory ideas right next to each other, forcing us, the readers, to hold the active creation of order and the sudden chaos of a fall in our minds at the exact same time. This isn't just an accident of writing, folks. It is a highly calculated rhetorical device designed specifically to evoke a profound sense of awe, intentionally breaking our preconceived notions of history. By refusing to give us a comfortable logical explanation, the text preserves the deep mystery of how this staggering leap in human progress actually occurred.
Which leads us to the analytical stage, decoding the claim. When the text says they fell from the sky, what are the actual interpretations of this framing? Let's unpack the two most prominent ways to read this. On one hand, is the text using a super powerful metaphor to describe a shockingly sudden rise in human development? We know from context that the shift from simple existence to complex civilization often appears in the historical record as incredibly abrupt. Imagine a society suddenly discovering advanced irrigation, the wheel, and the written word almost simultaneously. To an outside observer, that rapid acceleration of knowledge wouldn't feel like a gradual discovery at all. It would feel like a sudden gift from above. The author might just be saying the Sumerians developed so rapidly and with such unprecedented complexity that it appeared as though their civilization literally dropped out of the sky fully formed. Or, on the other hand, is the text referring to a literal, intense focus on ancient astronomy? Are they the civilization that fell from the sky because their entire societal structure was wholly dictated by the movements of celestial bodies? Think about an ancient culture where city layouts closely mirror constellations and where agricultural cycles are fiercely tied to lunar phases. If a society is fundamentally connected to the cosmos, their civilization basically becomes an earthly mirror of the sky. In that scenario, their entire way of life fell from their observations of the stars. The true genius of this brief source text is that it leaves room for both interpretations to exist perfectly side by side.
But behind all this deep linguistic analysis, right, through the paradoxes of celestial architects and the contrasting ideas of building versus falling, we absolutely have to recenter entirely on the core subject, the Sumerians. Behind the poetic phrasing and the explosive imagery of the source text lies a real, tangible anchor point in human history. The author directs all of this immense cosmic language toward this single identifier. They are the subject of the sentence. They are the architects. They are the ones who fell. By isolating their name and attaching it to such monumental descriptors, the text elevates the Sumerians from a mere historical footnote into a grand, almost mythological force. It frames them not just as ancient people, but as the fundamental interrupters of the human timeline. And honestly, that reframing profoundly changes our relationship with our own human ancestry. It asks us to look back not just with academic curiosity, but with a real sense of reverence for the sheer magnitude of what they accomplished, and just how abruptly they brought order to a totally chaotic world. And so, we arrive at the end of our textual deconstruction. We've looked at the source material from every possible angle, picking apart its brief but incredibly dense 16 words. We've explored the wild paradox of the deliberate architect and the sudden fall. But the true power of a great explainer isn't just in giving you the analysis. It's in turning the central mystery right back over to you. So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought. What does it truly mean for a civilization's origins to be described as falling from the sky? Does it change how you view the timeline of human progress? Does it make you question whether civilization is a slow, steady climb or a sudden, dramatic arrival? The source text demands that you rethink the very dawn of history. I highly encourage you to take this question, hold on to it, and let it spark your own independent exploration. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack these fascinating concepts today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.